Dear friends, welcome to yet another installment of Strategic Power. Iran has accused Israel of carrying out an airstrike against a building of the consulate within the complex of the Iranian embassy in Damascus, Syria. In this attack, 7 Iranian military advisors were killed, including Mohammad Reza Zahan, one of the top commanders of the Quds Force, an elite Iranian military unit. His death was seen by some as the most significant Iranian assassination since that of Qasem Soleimani by the United States in 2020. This incident is considered a serious escalation in the conflict between Iran and Israel, with Iran promising retaliation. Now, we will clarify what happened, why Israel carried out the attack, and what Iran's possible responses may be in this video. Before we continue, if you haven't already, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you're informed about our new videos. Before discussing recent events, let's review a bit of history. It may be hard to believe today, but Iran and Israel were close allies until the 1979 Islamic Revolution. At that time, Iran and Israel were strategic allies with common geopolitical interests. During the 1960s, both were concerned about the growing influence of the Soviet Union in the Middle East and the rise of Arab nationalism, led by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. Maintaining good relations with Iran was especially vital for Israel, as the country was the main oil supplier at the time. But even with the suspension of official relations after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the link between Israel and Iran did not completely break until the 1990s, and this was for 2 main reasons. First, there was a continuing strategic logic, especially after the Iranian invasion by Iraq in the early 1980s. At that time, Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, was seen as Israel's main regional rival, so Israel secretly supported Iran to weaken Iraq. Secondly, Israelis maintained hope that the Ayatollah regime would collapse. Even in 1987, then Defense Minister and future Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin stated that Iran is Israel's best friend, and we have no intention of changing our position toward Iran because the regime will not last forever. However, when it became clear that the Ayatollahs had consolidated power and that Iran emerged strengthened from the conflict with Iraq, Iran and Israel quickly became geopolitical rivals and have remained so ever since. Now, back to recent events. Israeli authorities generally avoid publicly discussing Israel's actions in Syria. In response to a question about Monday's airstrike, an Israeli military spokesman stated, "We don't comment on reports in foreign media." However, the New York Times quoted 4 anonymous Israeli sources confirming Israel's involvement in the attack. Additionally, a spokesman told CNN that Israel believes the target was a Quds Force military building disguised as a civilian building in Damascus, adding that, "According to our intelligence, this is not a consulate and not an embassy." After the airstrike, Syria's foreign and interior ministers visited the site, firmly condemning the attack as a heinous act of terrorism targeting the Iranian consulate building in Damascus that resulted in the death of several innocent people. Iran's foreign minister also described the attack as a violation of all international obligations and conventions. A foreign ministry spokesperson stated that Iran reserves the right to retaliate and will decide on the type of response and punishment against the aggressor. Now, before discussing how Iran may react to the attack, let's analyze some reasons why Israel may have decided to attack this specific target. It's important to note that Israeli attacks against Iranian and Iran-affiliated military facilities in Syria are not new and have been occurring before October 7th. However, these attacks have increased since then, and this latest attack is the first targeting the Iranian embassy complex. One obvious reason for Israel to conduct this attack is the intent to eliminate military commanders to weaken the operational capacity of Iran, which is considered Israel's main adversary and its regional allies. In fact, since October 7th, Israel has carried out a series of high-profile targeted assassinations outside of Israel and the Palestinian territories. Additionally, the attack can be interpreted as an attempt by Israel to test Iran's resolve and that of its allies. So far, Iran has not directly involved itself in the broader conflict, and clashes between Israel and Iran's allies have been relatively limited to an exchange of accusations. By observing Iran's response to this latest attack, Israel may better gauge the extent to which Iran is willing to get involved. However, from a more cynical perspective, the attack can also be interpreted as an attempt to keep the dynamics of the Israel-Iran conflict active, with the goal of avoiding a reduction in US support for Israel. Moreover, domestic politics in Israel cannot be ignored. As discussed in previous videos, Benjamin Netanyahu's popularity among the Israeli public has virtually collapsed since October 7th, and he is very likely to be ousted from office in the next elections. In fact, on Sunday, a day before the Damascus attack, Israel witnessed the largest protests since the war began, with tens of thousands of Israelis demanding a deal for hostage releases and Netanyahu's government to resign. Netanyahu has repeatedly rejected calls for new elections, arguing that this would divide Israel and undermine the war effort. Therefore, if Netanyahu has tied his political future to the continuation of the conflict, an escalation in hostilities with Iran and its allies like Lebanon and Syria could allow him to prolong the tenure of his threatened government. Regardless of motives, it remains to be seen how Iran will respond to this latest incident. Iran has promised a necessary retaliation, but it is still unclear how this will manifest. So far, Iran has been reluctant to get involved in any kind of large-scale war, so retaliation may come through its proxies and allies. For example, Iran-backed groups in Iraq and Syria may intensify attacks against US military positions. It is noteworthy that Iran's foreign minister held the US ultimately responsible, despite the US denying any prior knowledge or approval of the attack. Additionally, the response may come through Iran's Lebanese ally Hezbollah, which has already been engaged in near-daily clashes across the border with Israel. Furthermore, Iran may opt to attack Israel through other means like cyber attacks or seek a diplomatic offensive. For instance, it has already called for an urgent UN Security Council meeting on the matter. One potentially dangerous consequence of the attack, however, is that it may open the possibility for diplomatic centers to become targets for further attacks and retaliation. It is important to note that Israel's claim that the embassy was being used as a military outpost and therefore a legitimate target is actually not relevant in this context, as Iran is definitely treating it as an escalation. Even if the embassy was being misused, diplomatic premises are supposed to enjoy diplomatic immunity. Ultimately, Iran does not have many options to respond if it truly wishes to avoid further escalation. However, not responding will also undermine Iran's military deterrence credibility and could embolden Israel to take further actions against it. This means Iran finds itself in quite a delicate situation.